New Yorkers, they're rude, they're crude, they don't give you any time, no one's friendly when you walk down the street. I don't get that.
No,
I don't
it's
get that
not
at all.
true.
I actually love
That's a
the
huge
people.
misconception,
It's a huge
yeah.
misconception. When we walk down the street, I love how friendly people are to.
He's standing in front of another granite countertop, flashing that signature grin, selling the dream of renovation and partnership and effortless charm. But if you look closely at Drew Scott in the last 2 years, something has changed. The energy is different, the jokes land a half-second slower, and the brother who built an empire on being the fun one, that charismatic one, the one who made flipping houses look like a party, has quietly started to disappear from the very spotlight he spent 15 years chasing. This isn't about scandal. It's about something more unsettling. What happens when the performance you created to survive becomes the thing slowly erasing you? Most people think they know Drew Scott, the tall one, the funny one, the one who dances badly on purpose and turns every house tour into a bit. But that version of Drew, the one millions of people invite into their living rooms every week, was never supposed to be the whole person. It was supposed to be a character, a role, a sales pitch that worked so well it became a trap. Here's what almost no one talks about. Drew Scott has spent the last 20 years playing a part written by someone else, and the person who wrote it was his identical twin. Stop here for a moment, because this is where the story actually begins. Not with HGTV, not with fame, not even with real estate. It begins in childhood, in a family that needed Drew to be one thing so Jonathan could be another. The serious one and the silly one, the contractor and the entertainer, the introvert and the extrovert. Except Drew wasn't naturally an extrovert. He was a kid who learned early that being loud, being charming, being the one who made people laugh was the only way to stand out next to a brother who was quieter, more focused, more confident in his craft. By the time they were teenagers, the roles had hardened into identity. Jonathan was the builder, Drew was the performer. And when they started flipping houses together in their early 20s, those roles became a business model. Jonathan would do the work, Drew would do the talking. It was efficient, it was profitable, and it locked Drew into a version of himself that had no room for doubt, exhaustion, or the creeping suspicion that he was disappearing behind his own smile. The show that made them famous launched in 2011. Property Brothers was an instant hit, and the reason was simple. People loved the dynamic, the straight man and the goofball, the guy who knew how to frame a wall, and the guy who knew how to sell a vision. Drew became the face of the brand, the one who carried the emotional arc of every episode, the one who had to make every client feel seen, heard, and excited even when the budget was blown and the timeline was collapsing. And Drew was good at it. Too good. Because the better he performed, the more the producers leaned on him, the more the network expanded the franchise, buying and selling, brother versus brother, forever home, at home. By 2018, Drew and Jonathan had filmed more than 300 episodes across multiple series. They were on television 52 weeks a year, and Drew was the engine of all of it, the one who had to be on every single day in every single scene, no matter what was happening in his actual life. But here's the thing about performing joy for a living. Eventually, your body starts to forget how to feel it when the cameras turn off. By several accounts, Drew began struggling with exhaustion as early as 2015. Not just physical tiredness, emotional flatness. The kind of depletion that comes from spending years giving more energy than you're taking in. Friends noticed he was quieter off camera. His then-girlfriend, later wife, Linda Fawn, mentioned in interviews that Drew would sometimes come home from set and barely speak. He would sit in silence, staring at nothing, too drained to explain what was wrong. And what was wrong was this. Drew Scott had built a career on being endlessly likable, endlessly available, endlessly enthusiastic. But that version of Drew wasn't a person. It was a product, and the market wanted more of it every quarter. The first crack in the facade came in 2019, though almost no one noticed it at the time. Drew and Linda got married in a massive, heavily publicized ceremony in Italy. It was covered by People magazine. It trended on social media. It looked like a fairy tale. But if you go back and watch Drew in the interviews around that wedding, you can see something off. He's saying all the right things, he's smiling, but the lightness is gone. He looks like a man going through motions he's been trained to execute. Linda later said, in a podcast interview that got almost no attention, that Drew had told her he didn't know if he wanted to keep doing the show. Not because he hated it, but because he wasn't sure who he was anymore when he wasn't performing. He had spent so long being the fun brother, the hype man, the guy who made everything seem easy, that he had lost access to the parts of himself that were uncertain, sad, or afraid. That's the hidden cost of being the face of a brand that never stops growing. You don't get to have a bad day. You don't get to be complicated. You don't get to admit that the thing making you famous is also making you hollow. Then came 2020. The pandemic shut down production. For the first time in nearly a decade, Drew had nothing to promote, nowhere to be, no one to perform for. And instead of relief, he felt something closer to panic. Because without the show, without the schedule, without the role, he didn't know what he was supposed to do. He didn't know how to be Drew Scott when Drew Scott wasn't working. In interviews from that period, you can hear him trying to frame the break as a positive. He talked about slowing down, spending time with Linda, reflecting on what mattered. But the subtext was everywhere. He was lost. The identity he'd built his entire adult life around had been paused, and he had no idea who he was in the silence. When production resumed in 2021, something had shifted. Drew was still showing up, still delivering the lines, still playing the part. But people who worked with him noticed he was different, less improvisational, more scripted. He was doing the job, but the joy that had once made him magnetic was gone. He looked tired, not just physically, existentially. And then, quietly, he started stepping back. It wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, no public breakdown, no tell-all interview. But if you track Drew's on-screen presence from 2021 to now, the pattern is clear. Fewer episodes, fewer spin-offs, fewer press tours. Jonathan, meanwhile, has ramped up. He's doing solo projects. He's the one launching new shows. He's the one expanding the brand. And Drew, the brother who was supposed to be the star, has been fading into the background of his own empire. Some fans have noticed. Reddit threads ask if he's okay. Twitter users speculate about tension between the brothers. But the mainstream narrative hasn't caught up yet, because Drew is still smiling in the promotional photos, still posting on Instagram, still showing up just enough to maintain the illusion that everything is fine. But it's not fine. And the reason it's not fine is because Drew Scott spent 2 decades being famous for being himself, except the himself he was being famous for wasn't real. It was a performance that started as a survival strategy, became a career, and eventually became a cage. Here's the part that makes this story tragic instead of just sad. Drew didn't fail. He succeeded. He became exactly what he set out to be. He became beloved. He became wealthy. He became recognizable in every airport and grocery store in North America. And all of it required him to abandon the parts of himself that didn't fit the brand. The women in his life saw it. Linda has said, carefully, that she had to learn how to reach the version of Drew that existed underneath the TV personality. His mother has said in interviews that she worries about him, not because he's struggling publicly, but because he's struggling quietly in the gap between who people think he is and who he actually is. And that's the real question this story asks. What do you do when the thing that made you successful is the thing that's killing you? Because Drew's not addicted to drugs. He's not broke. He's not embroiled in scandal. He's suffering from something much harder to name. He's suffering from the slow erasure that comes from spending years being a character instead of a person. And unlike a scandal, there's no clear way out. No rehab, no apology tour, no redemption arc. Just the quiet, grinding realization that you've lost yourself somewhere along the way, and you're not sure how to get back. By 2023, Drew had largely disappeared from new Property Brothers content. Jonathan was doing interviews alone. The press releases stopped emphasizing the brothers angle and started focusing on Jonathan's vision, Jonathan's projects, Jonathan's expertise. And Drew, the one who was supposed to be the star, was barely mentioned. It's possible this is a choice. It's possible Drew finally said no. It's possible he decided that stepping back was the only way to stop disappearing. But it's also possible that he's just too tired to fight anymore. That after 20 years of being the fun one, the charming one, the one who made everything look easy, he's finally run out of the energy required to keep pretending. And that's the thing nobody tells you about fame when it's built on personality. It doesn't matter how much people love you. If the version of you they love isn't real, their love can't save you. It can only make you more alone. Look at that opening image again. Drew Scott, standing in front of another kitchen island, smiling for another camera. What we're watching isn't success. It's a man trapped inside a highlight reel of his own life, unable to stop performing long enough to figure out who he'd be if he ever stood still. The cruelest part is that people still think he's fine, because that's what he spent his entire career teaching them to believe. He didn't lose his fame. He lost himself to it. And the price wasn't paid in scandal or collapse. It was paid in silence, in slow erasure, in the growing distance between the man on screen and the man who goes home when the lights go off. That's what really happened to Drew Scott. He became exactly who he was supposed to be, and it destroyed him, quietly, in a way no one was watching for.